One Church, One Child board. His commitment to that board makes it what it is, I'm telling you, because he continues to see to it that One Church, One Child represents what its original articles were set out to do. And so he's been a real blessing there. To the pastor of this great church, Pastor Smith, and I'm going to hold him to his word. He said a little earlier that if there was anything that he could do, church could do while we was here, they'd be more than happy to. So I got a few credit card bills I'd like to leave with you before I go. Make sure, Pastor Smith, that you take care of those for me. I'll be very happy get back home to know that those are taken care of. The Dr. King celebration is an honor. It's an honor and it's a privilege for not just black churches or black people. Dr. King, I think, became a model of liberty and freedom for the entire country. I'm grieved at the fact, though, that it was belated when he was honored as he was supposed to be from the beginning. That states had to fight to honor Dr. King on that day. Businesses were wrangling over whether or not they were going to close and honor that day. Schools had some difficulty with it. But we're grateful that what Dr. King truly represented is beginning to reach the hearts of the people of this nation and the world. And certainly this day should not pass without us remembering the great works of this great man. For a lot was put into him accomplishing what he had to accomplish. He was not just a great orator. He was not just a great speaker. He was not just an educated preacher. But he paid the ultimate sacrifice in order to accomplish the things that we call today the dream. He paid with his life, and his family paid as well. And do you know that today there are certain sectors that are complaining about the King family capitalizing on his name? That they want to sell and merchandise the name of Dr. Martin Luther King. On a personal note, I think Coretta Scott King and her 4 children should get everything that she possibly can out of the name of Dr. Martin Luther King. For he dreamed a dream that he knew he would never get to enjoy himself. That takes the ultimate sacrifice. Sometimes we don't even want to do for God, but unless God can assure us that we're going to be blessed, not before we leave here, but real soon. And if he can't seem to demonstrate that, then we're a little hesitant about making sacrifices unto God. It is an honor for me to be here today because I remember marching with Dr. King in Birmingham, Alabama, where I was born and raised. I remember when he came to Birmingham. He was sent for by a Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, who had come to do revival at my mother's church, which was pastored by Reverend James Pfeiffer, Zion Star Baptist Church. And Reverend Shuttlesworth, by the time Dr. King got there, had already had his home and church bombed. He had already been jailed and beaten trying to enroll his children in Phillips High School because supposedly it had been desegregated. And all of the things that Dr. Shuttlesworth had gone through went unnoticed. So he is somewhat of an unsung hero. But he sent for Dr. King to come to Birmingham and to assist him. And I remember when he got there. I remember the times. I remember the things that went on. They are etched in my memory, and it's something that I don't even choose to forget because it becomes unleaded gas for me when I need to be fuel for the fight. It is not a matter of being hateful or full of hatred or to hate anybody, but every now and then you need something to spark the battle and to let you know that, we haven't yet arrived. And there is need to remind people that there is justice that still must be done. But Dr. King gave his life. He came to Birmingham and we marched up and down the streets of Birmingham, Alabama. We gathered at Kelly Ingram Park right across the street from A.G. Gaston Motel, where Dr. King and black pastors met to strategize about what the fight was going to be. It was kitty corner to 16th Street Baptist Church, where 4 young girls got killed. I remember the Sunday I was at work and you could hear the bomb blast go off all over the city. We didn't know where it came from because we were on the south end and 16th Street Baptist Church was on the north end of town. But the city rumbled when that bomb went off. You knew something tragic, something horrific had taken place. We didn't know what, but we knew something bad had taken place. And people began to gather around their radios and TVs. Birmingham had become known as Bombingham because of the bombs that went off in stadiums, churches, homes. Bombs used to go off in the middle of the street, and then when people gathered, then another bomb would go off with shrapnel inside that would blind and maim people. Anybody that gave themselves to the struggle lost jobs. If you marched in the march, your parents lost jobs and people were fired. Difficulties were made. You couldn't get credit because if they saw your name or names of your relatives appearing in the newspaper, then you were fired or credit was not extended to you. Sometimes you find out the situations with your cars being repossessed. My mama told me and asked us not to participate in the marches. She said, baby, because I'll get fired. But we would sneak and get into the marches and be a part of because the racism and the extent of racism and how it pained and hurt had reached somewhere deep down in my heart. And I was only 17 years old when we got ready to get with the marches. I remember when our school teacher came up and said what was going on downtown, and she rehearsed it unto us, and she said, looked at the class, and everybody was quiet, and she said, what are y'all waiting on? And the whole class got up and went out, and we went downtown and became part of the march, only to find Bull Connor's dogs and fire hoses put on us, blowing us up against the buildings and blowing women up against the buildings and blooding their heads. And all of these things went on, and you would wonder sometime how in the world could one human being do this to another human being. I used to try to deal with that in my mind, and how do you come to the place of hating somebody like that? I didn't understand it when soldiers came up and down the street and we found ourselves being under that kind of oppression, and they were running everybody into their houses. The men standing on their porches, and the soldiers took the butt of their gun and jammed the men in the chest and told them to get off the street. I remember what my stepfather said when this young soldier came up to him, and he pulled the gun back and got ready to hit him in the chest with the butt of the gun, and he said, son, if you hit me with that gun, you're going to have to turn it around and shoot me. This is my house. This is where I pay rent, and I'm going to stand right here on my porch. I didn't see anything like that until I went to Johannesburg, South Africa. And I saw the same thing going on in South Africa. And I began to wonder to myself, God, are you trying to tell me something? That every time I turn around, I'm running into what oppression is all about. And I began to see that whenever I would minister the gospel of the kingdom, it always had a mixture of what the civil struggle was all about and the responsibility of the people and those of us in this generation had to do to continue the dream. If we leave it only being a celebration, we do Dr. King an injustice. If it is only somewhat symbolic, then we do Dr. King a tremendous injustice. For this man was not just a civil rights leader. He was not just a humanitarian. Dr. Martin Luther King was a prophet to the nation. For whenever prophets were sent, according to the Bible, a prophet was sent at the failure of civil rulers to carry out civil law. And whenever those rulers had failed in their duties, God would send a prophet. If the nation had gone wrong, if the priests had gotten lax in their duties. And normally whenever the prophet showed up, the people began to fret and fear, because they knew if the prophet showed up, something had to be done. Oh, it was a little different from what we know church to be today. Sometimes we can shout and dance in church, but we ain't gonna do nothing afterwards. You see, I don't mind people shouting and dancing is good. And I'm gonna get on the good foot with you. But when we come down, we got to hit the ground running. We got to be doing something. When Dr. King came, he was to remind a nation that if you're going to live out the meaning of its creed and the tenets of your faith, then you were going to have to take a stand against injustice or throw your Bibles in the waste can. See, perhaps some of us didn't realize what had to be done when we talked about regeneration then. Because you see, they had ruled almost to the degree that black people were inhuman. Because see, if you were an animal, if you were not human, it was okay to treat you inhumane. But if you were human, then the Bible demanded that you be treated right. How could we, in our beautiful stained glass windows, in beautiful steeples and edifices called churches, stand and preach a gospel of the kingdom 11 o'clock every Sunday morning and never let that gospel reach our hearts? You see, that gospel was supposed to do something in terms of conversion in our hearts. You are not supposed to be the same thing. And that if there is a change, then we understand that we must treat people differently. This generation has a responsibility that I want to stir your pure consciousness with today. The Premier of Israel, the Prime Minister, once said at the UN, he said, made the statement that there will never be another Holocaust. Menachem Begin made that statement because Israel had taken steps to ensure that there would never be another Holocaust. It was not just a statement he was making. It was just not some nice phrase that he was rehearsing in the ears of the people, but Israel had taken steps to ensure that there would never be another Holocaust. This generation has a responsibility as well to see to it that we do not backtrack into the days of segregation, that we do not backtrack into the days of the humiliation that our people foreknew. We have a responsibility to live up to it, and don't fool yourself like everybody knows. I've written about 5 successful plays, and I remember when we were doing one play called I Am, We Are, that before there can be a we are, there's got to be an I am. I got to first come into the understanding of my own identity before I can mix up with yours. Otherwise, I lose mine in the process. We were doing the play in rehearsal, and I kept noticing that the young people kept running across the punchline. And the punchline wasn't coming through as powerful as it ought to have been. So I told everybody to sit down, and everybody sat down, and I said, let me ask y'all some questions. Who is Huey Newton? And they said, I don't know. I said, can you tell me who Bobby Seale is, or Angela Davis, or Elridge Cleaver? Can you tell me who Stokely Carmichael is? And somebody wanted to know, for what reason are you pushing what they believe? Absolutely not, but it's a part of your history. And they had no idea who these people were. We are raising a generation that's coming up that don't know and isn't familiar with the blood, sweat, and tears that went down the drain to buy the right to vote. We're raising a generation that's more concerned about the rap that demeans women and demeans black families than they are about what it took to get to where we are. And so there is a tremendous responsibility that rests upon this generation to rehearse it in the ears of our young people. Did you know, biblically speaking, that every Jewish family would sit down at the table, and in obeying the Mosaic law, the Bible said they rehearsed the Mosaic law in their children's ears as they sat at the table. Moses instructed them to talk about it as you walk along the way. He said, when you're sitting on the banks, he said, talk about the law. And I'm just wondering here today, how many times have we sat with our young people, and even as family members, just to talk about what we did to get to where we are? Are you listening to me? I will never in my life forget the side of 16th Street Baptist Church with the walls torn out. I will never forget what Chris McNair said concerning his daughter, Denise McNair, when they found her in the basement of that church with the brick embedded in her head. I will never forget Denise Collins and our Addie Collins. I will never forget the children when they brought those little bitty bodies out of there and the sheets were bloody on that Sunday morning. I will never forget that. And I would sit down all the time with my children and make them watch these civil rights movies and make them watch the history of our people. And I told them, you promised me one thing. You don't owe me nothing for feeding you. You don't owe me nothing for providing you with your own bedroom. But I want you to promise me that you would tell it to your children and make your children's children promise it to you to not forget where we came from and where we gotta go. Dr. King was a very important man that had somewhat likened himself unto Moses, in that the day he died, Dr. King had said simply the day before, I've been to the mountaintop and I viewed the promised land, that I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. 24 hours later, Dr. King was going to be dead. Moses said almost a similar statement upon Mount Nebo in instructing Israel to make sure that they did not forget the God that brought them up out of Egypt and to be true to the principles of God. And because of this symbolism, we have likened Moses, Dr. King, unto Moses. But we live in what is called the Joshua dispensation, because laws have been passed and we supposedly have entered into Canaan. And we're supposed to be drinking a little bit of the milk and honey. But the Joshua dispensation created a failure. And the failure of the Joshua dispensation is found in Judges, the 3rd chapter. It says in Judges, the 3rd chapter, that the dispensation of Joshua failed to train leaders after them. And what happened is the devil waited until all of Joshua's men died out, and everybody that was familiar with the power of God under Joshua died out. And you know what was the result? They went into 440 years of bondage, 9 apostasies, and 7 servitude, because they forgot where they'd come from. They did not train leaders to come after them. And sometimes in the struggle, what ends up happening are the people at the forefront that help create the liberties and the freedom start enjoying the freedoms, and sometimes will sit back and ride on their laurels, and leaders don't know what happened. And we today must understand there is a tremendous responsibility to make sure that we know the prices that was paid. I noticed something that took place after the civil rights movement of the 60s. We men gathered at the parks. We were there to hear the message of Dr. King, the Andrew Youngs, the Hosea Williams, the Fred Shuttlesworth. We were there to hear them encouraging everybody to get into the marches. But something happened after the 60s struggle. Men began to leave the church. Men began to abandon their families. And as men began to abandon their families, it left a vacuum and a void in the black community. It left the responsibility of upholding the church on the women. And it's a strange thing. We put that responsibility upon them while telling them to get in their place. I'll leave that alone. I just thought I'd throw that in. It won't cost you nothing. I just thought I'd throw that in. It won't cost you nothing. Dr. Parks knows that we fighting right now to get a woman on one church, one child board. I don't know how in the Sam Hill you can talk about family without having a woman represented on that board. So I'm trying to get one right now. And some people ain't gonna like that, but then, so what else is new? But men begin to abandon their homes and their families, and they begin to abandon the church. Then we begin to read about the different pathologies that took place in our society, with crime going up, and we begin to occupy the jails more than anybody else. We saw what was taking place in our homes, and we saw that over 60% of black homes were being ran by one parent, and that one parent happened to have been a female. So I can see then the responsibility coming out of the civil rights movement and the subsequent movement happened to be something perhaps a little bit different than just symbolism. I believe that it has to do with something that is really an old formula in the Bible when you talk about revival. The greatest revival that had ever taken place in the history of the Bible was when Jesus came on the scene. And before Jesus came, in St. Luke 1:17, God thought it necessary to create and to prepare a forerunner before him. And he talked about the forerunner's message and what was going to be the essence of his message. He said that when John the Baptist would come, he would turn the hearts of the fathers unto the children, and the hearts of the children to the fathers, and them to the disobedient to the wisdom of the just. Listen to what God says the formula for revival had to do with. It had to do with fathers returning to their responsibility to family, and that also to God. In other words, it was a restoration of parental fidelity, which the denial of and the decay thereof is certainly the beginning of religious and social corruption in our community. God thought in order for the people to prepare to hear what Jesus Christ had to say, the preparation of revival had to do with men returning to children, and that to church, and that to God. Here is the succession that God seemed to have placed it in. Well, that to me says then that there is a prerequisite and a tremendous responsibility that rests upon the church. That if we're going to talk about renewal, if we're going to talk about doing something, then we've got to make a conscious effort to go after men in our community. It's not enough to rattle off statistics about how we overpopulate the prisons, or how we're dying in the streets from crack, cocaine, and drug use and gang usage. It's not enough to spat those things off. We've got to do something about it. We got to specifically target these men and keeping them out of prison and getting them returned to home. Can you say amen? Well, you say, well, Bishop Dawson, how can some of those things be done? Well, when you talk about solutions, I believe one of the things that can be done, the church has to create programs that are specifically designed to win men back into the church. We've got to go get them where they live. We've got to let them know that there is a God that is concerned about them. And we got to win them back, because we have a job to do. We as a people, I believe, are supposed to speak to this nation about where this nation really stands. The world don't know who we are. Sometimes don't even realize the value of us even in this nation. Here is the reason why it can be argued by so many people that black people are a burden to the United States of America. Can you imagine the premier of Japan coming on American soil and insult black people and say that the problem with America is its black people? There was no way that this should have been tolerated on any level in our nation, because we don't know our history and we haven't reminded other people of our history. Sometimes folk don't really know what our real worth is. But can I shoot this at you for just a moment, please? About 1800, cotton in America was at about 15 cents a pound. Land, one of the most valuable things in America, was at $1 an acre. But a slave was $600. In 1840, cotton was at 15 cents a pound still. Land was up 50 cents at $1.50 an acre. But a slave was $1,200. In 1862, cotton had gone down a couple of pennies, and now at 13 cents a pound. Land was up to $2.50 per acre, but a slave was $1,800. You say, well, Bishop Dawson, what is the important value of all of that? Well, let me show you. When you stop and consider what the value of slavery and slave trade was in America, it had gotten up to some $7 billion, the capital of investment in America. During that time in 1860, it exceeded all other business investments, including business in the North and the South and the federal budget combined. This means then that slavery and slave trading was the major business in the United States. Are you listening to me? See, when you want to talk about the real value, and the richest percentage of people in this nation, the 1% of the richest people in this country, owns half the country's wealth, over $10 trillion. 1/3 comes from hard work, 2/3 come from inheritance that's drawing interest upon interest. You know what that means? If it come 2/3 come from inheritance, it means most of the wealth of this nation actually comes from what slavery meant in building this nation. Are you listening to me? I didn't expect to get too many hand claps on that, but that's all right. We preachers are supposed to tell the truth, you know. Now, if you want to know the real value of that, if you can give airlines today free labor, none of them would be closing down because of the status of our nation right now. Any corporation that can operate with free labor don't have to worry about bankruptcy and closing down. This country basically was built on the free labor that slaves provided and the slave trade during slavery. All of these things suggest that there is a place for us and something should be done. Yet when reparations are discussed in this nation, we discuss it sometimes tongue in cheek. We cross our fingers and are scared who's going to get angry because we talk in terms of reparation. But black people have never declared war on America. Black people have never gone to war against America. Black people have never created any terrorism against America. They've never done that. But they've always stood side by side with our flag in war to save America, only to come back home in America and denied rights as being a part of America. I'm not saying that everybody got to go down to the ADC office and get them a check, though sometimes I differ on what ADC means. I don't think it always means aid to dependent children. Sometimes it means aid to dependent corporations. I don't think everybody's got to go down there to do that. But there are ways that our government can help. And I'm sure that if Dr. Martin Luther King was here today, he would be talking along these very same lines. Because he mentioned something about America giving black America a bad check. She had promised something like 40 acres and a mule that we were never able to cash. And so when you talk about being on the same playing field with what you call corporate America and what you call normal America, we've never been able to catch up. And yet people talk about us having problems being who we are and where we are. That you won't give in and be real Christians and forget about slavery. How can I forget about slavery when you got 300 years ahead of me and tell me to run side by side? I can't run side by side when you're already 300 years ahead of me. I thought y'all called me to tell the truth today. And if you want a little Bible with that, Moses, in instructing Israel, said in Exodus 22 that if a man steal another man's goods, he's supposed to restore him fourfold. Then he said, if you go so far as to steal another man's man, if you take a human, you pay with your life. I'm just standing here wondering today if Bible is right, if America has never paid up on black America. How does a God of justice look at that? Is he still holding some debt over America's head? Could it be that some of the things that happeneth unto America happening because we ain't never made some things right with black America yet? Could it be? Could it be? Because when you get saved, Dr. Parks, if I was a bank robber when I got saved and I give my heart to Christ, I can't keep the money that I stole. If I'm going to be saved, I got to give the money back. And then I'm going to be saved. But everybody's talking about let's pray a prayer of reconciliation. That's all well and good, but I still want my money back. That's all well and good. Because we understand that slavery was not just a moral ill. Slavery was also an economic ill. And black people helped made and created this nation. And sometimes, somewhere, you got to stop and decide you'll pay the ultimate sacrifice. Whatever it takes to get there. Frederick Douglass once said in 1896, right before his death, they wanted to know and asked him before, how come he wouldn't help John Brown raid Harper's Ferry? He said then at that time that the reason because there's no way you're going to be successful in this black revolt. But John Brown wanted Frederick Douglass to come with him because he didn't believe black people would follow a white man in no revolt. But Frederick Douglass declined, the most famous black man in America at that time. But upon his deathbed, Frederick Douglass confessed what the real reason was. He said, the real reason that I did not get to be a part of the revolt is that I was afraid. Very simple. I can be the most educated black man in America. I can be welcome in pulpits and podiums all over America. I can be one of the most noted black men all over America. But when it comes down to putting up a real fight, Frederick Douglass was afraid. And I want you to understand that it's not easy to carry on the legacy of a Martin Luther King. I remember when he came to Birmingham and white preachers wrote black preachers and told them, do not participate in the struggle with this man that's come to disrupt our city. There were noted preachers who we listen to and whose books we buy today that told Dr. King, the time is not now. This is what provoked his famous letter from the Birmingham jail. Why? We cannot wait. But people were scared of getting their houses bombed. They were afraid of what would happen to them. But are we so naive as to think that we're going to achieve freedom, we're going to be able to achieve equality just by marching? Are we so naive as to think that all we got to do is be satisfied with symbolism and we shall achieve freedom? I hope we don't think that we have already arrived. I hope we don't think that we are already there, because nothing can be more deceptive than to think you got something that you don't.